Good morning if you are in the West Coast, and good afternoon if you are in the East Coast of the United States, and good evening if you are in Europe, Greece, or Turkey, joining us for this 11th WhatsApp meeting brought to you by the Ottoman and Turkish Studies Association. My name is Baki Tezcan. I teach history at the University of California at Davis, and I'm the convener of the WhatsApp meetings. Next month, we'll have another one. It's going to be featuring a project that is going on at Sabancı University under the leadership of Abdurrahman, and it will look at the Ottoman ulema and building a database about them. Today, we have an exciting one. It's very exciting because it is about Janissaries, a topic very dear to my heart, but I won't say much about it. I'm going to pass the virtual mic to my colleague, Christine Filiu, Professor of History at University of California, Berkeley, whom all of you know. She and I talked about this particular event and are bringing it to you together in cooperation with her Eastern Mediterranean initiative at the University of California at Berkeley. Christine, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Baki. It's a pleasure. Introductions, and I'm thrilled that our lecture series converged with, and it's great to see so many people. I will just introduce the speakers and let them take it away. Yannis Spiropoulos finished his PhD entitled Social, Administrative, Economic, and Political Dimensions of the Ottoman Army, the Janissaries of Crete, 1750 to 1826, in 2014. At the Department of History, Archaeology, and Institute of Mediterranean Studies. As a postdoctoral researcher, he's worked at the Centre d'études turques, Ottoman, Balkanique, et Centro-Asiatique in Paris, 2015 to 2016, and the Institute of Mediterranean Studies, Forth, 2016-17 and 2017-18. He's the author of Ottoman Administration and Society in Pre-Revolutionary Western Crete, Archival Testimonies, 1817 to 1819 in Greek. His research mainly revolves around the early modern Mediterranean, and his publications deal with subjects such as the large landed estates in the Balkans, the study of slavery and water management in Ottoman Crete, the African diaspora of the Ottoman Empire, and the economic, social, and political history of Ottoman military institutions. Aysel Yıldız, PhD 2008, Sabancı University, is a political and social historian of the 18th and 19th century Ottoman history, focusing on social movements, political culture, as well as various dynamics of discontent and modernization of the same period. She's the editor of books entitled Asiler ve Gaziler, Kabakçı Mustafa Risalesi, 2007, and A Military History of the Mediterranean Sea, Aspects of War, Diplomacy, and Military Elites, edited by herself and G. Theotokis. And she also authored the books Crisis and Rebellion in the Ottoman Empire, The Downfall of the Sultan in the Age of Revolution in 2017, and Kenar Adamları ve Bendeleri, Rusçuk Ayağına Tirsinikli İsmail Ağa ve Alemdar Mustafa Paşa'nın Adamları Manuk Mirzayan ve Köse Ahmet Efendi in 2018. İrfan Koktaş is an assistant professor of history at İzmir Katip Çelebi University, specializing in the socioeconomic history of the Ottoman Balkans and Western Anatolia. He was awarded his doctoral degree for his dissertation entitled When the Countryside is Free, Urban Politics, Local Autonomy, and the Changing Social Structure in Ottoman Salonika, 1740 to 1820, at Binghamton University, New York. He's published several articles on the socioeconomic history of the Ottoman Balkans and Western Anatolia, such as land ownership, tax farming, and the social structure of local credit markets in the Ottoman Balkans, 1685 to 1855, money, peasant mobility, chiefliks, and local politics in Salonika, 1740 to 1820, and sheep, cotton, wheat, and commerce, changes and continuities in the demo-economic system of chiefliks in Western Anatolia during the 1745 to 1845 period, which is forthcoming in Halcyon Days in Crete 10 from Crete University Press. In the Janet project, which we're talking about today, Irfan examines the activities of Janissaries in the commercial, credit, and real estate markets of Vidin, Rus, and Sofia, with a special focus on their political and military connections in the Danubian principalities. And last but not least, Mehmet Mert Sunar, associate professor, got his PhD in history at State University of New York, Binghamton in 2006. His dissertation entitled Cauldron of Descent, A History of the Janissary Corps, 1807 to 1826, examined socioeconomic and political roles of Janissaries during the early reign of Sultan Mahmud II. Granted fellowships by State University of New York, Turkish Higher Education Council, and after finishing his PhD, he worked at the International Relations Department in the university from 2006 to 2011. Focusing on Ottoman social and military history, Sunar studies Ottoman military institutions, civil military relations, and wartime mobilization in the Ottoman Empire. He currently teaches Ottoman military and social history in the history department at Istanbul Medeniyet University, and he has published articles and book chapters in various journals and collected volumes. He's the author of March Forward, Drills, Drill Manuals, and Organization in the Asakiri Mansure Army in Turkish. And he's a researcher in Janet, Janissaries in Ottoman port cities, Muslim financial and political networks in the early modern Mediterranean. And he is also in charge of a research team indexing Janissary payroll registers. So with that, I hand the floor over. Welcome.
Thank you.
I believe Yanis is first.
All right. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, yes.
For some reason, I could not unmute myself. All right. So thank you very much, Christine, for this introduction. And I mean, I would like to thank all of you for being here today. And above all, Christine, Baki, and Jelena, of course, like for not organizing this particular online meeting, but also an entire lecture series. And so thank you so much for inviting us and for making this possible. So we're here to present our ERC project called JANET, an acronym which stands for Janissary Networks. And the entire title of the project would be Janissaries in Ottoman Cities, as Christine has already said, Muslim financial and political networks in the early modern Mediterranean. So I would just try to give you a short overview of the project, and then my colleagues, Aysel Yildiz, who stands next to me, Irfan Koktash and Mert Sunar, will present some aspects of their own research in the framework of the project. So I'm going to share my screen in order for you to be able to follow my PowerPoint presentation. All right. Let me see. Okay. Please tell me if you're seeing what I see. All right. Okay. Okay, so the project officially started in February 2020 and has a budget of approximately 1.5 million euros. So far, our team comprises more than 25 people, including not only senior researchers and postdocs, but also PhD and MA students, software engineers, administrative and research assistants, as well as an advisory committee consisting of Virginia Aksan, Antonis Anastasopoulos, Linda Darling, Jane Hathaway, and Baki Tescan. Now, this is a project hosted at the Institute for Mediterranean Studies of the Foundation for Research and Technology, HELAS, and although people from various academic institutions collaborate with us, it is only 3 institutions that are officially involved in the project as beneficiaries. And that is, of course, the IMS, the Institute for Mediterranean Studies, Medeniyet University of Istanbul, and Katip Çelebi University of Izmir. Now, if we were to describe Janet's goal in a nutshell, we would say that it aims at investigating the economic and socio-political role of the Janissaries, that is the Ottoman Standing Army's main salaried infantry in the 18th and early 19th centuries, through their examination as a complex of interconnected networks in the extended Mediterranean. And by extended, we also mean including major Black Sea and Danubian port cities. So our project treats the Janissary Corps as a key institution, the study of which can disclose important aspects of the Muslim economic and political activity in this region. So basically, Janet puts forward an approach which revolves around three major research axes. The first axis is the study of the administrative and social developments that led to the formation of local and trans-provincial Muslim networks in the Ottoman Ottoman Empire. The second axis is the revision of the currently existing deeply unbalanced view of the 18th and early 19th century Eastern Mediterranean trade, one in which seemingly only non-Muslims, either from various Western European countries or from the Ottoman Empire, played an important role. And the third axis is the examination of the transference of political mobilizations and the exchange of ideas between the Muslim communities of the Mediterranean. So one might ask, why study the Janissaries? Why studying the Janissaries is important for the history of Muslims in the Mediterranean? In order to answer this question, one has to look at the institution's trajectory by following the changes that it underwent up until the 18th century. So Janissaries, as you all may know, used to be an elite guard of the Ottoman Sultan, which played a great role in the early Ottoman military expansion and in the shaping of the empire's entire administration. Recruitment of soldiers for the corps was originally based on the compulsory levy of Christian youths called the devshirme, but from the late 16th century onward, this practice started to decline and was eventually replaced by the acceptance in the corps of born Muslims. Through time, the corps became so accessible to Ottoman Muslims that enrollment in it became extremely widespread, to the extent that sources of the 18th and early 19th centuries often mentioned that entire male Muslim populations in a number of Ottoman cities were becoming Janissaries. During this expansion, the Janissaries also started to gradually acquire a more decentralized identity, with most Janissary regiments acquiring permanent presence in provincial fortresses. This permanent presence offered low and mid-ranking officers the chance to create extended networks and strong affiliations with provincial societies, and to become influential power brokers at the local level. At the same time, the evolution of the Janissary regiment's common funds into major credit institutions gave momentum to their members' private economic activities. Thanks to their regiment's financial support and protection, all sorts of Janissary affiliates started getting involved in the empire's commercial life, especially in places with increased military presence and trading activity. Janissary networks often evolved into autonomous loci of financial power. This phenomenon was directly linked to the unofficial acceptance into the corps of thousands of local Muslims. And in this framework, various Muslim communities seized the opportunity to establish strong contacts with each other by using parts of the corps' empire-wide organizational structure as a platform for the creation of extended interprovincial networks and diasporic communities. In the absence of a central Ottoman banking system, the role of far-reaching credit institutions, such as those used by the Janissaries in the creation and circulation of capital throughout the empire, seems to have had great importance for the development of Muslim commercial activities. While the liaisons created between Janissary units provided a variety of benefits to their affiliates who were interested in commerce, including the connections, solidarity, and trust necessary for the establishment of long-distance trade. I also have to note that these Janissary connections were not only of an economic, but also of a political nature. On the empire's periphery, where in the course of the 18th century, the socio-political influence of Janissaries became dominant, the corps' long experience of political activism in Istanbul was proliferated and adjusted to the political realities prevalent in different provinces. The 18th century was marked, for instance, by numerous provincial revolts, and Janissary involvement in such incidents was one of its most distinctive characteristics. So Janet aspires to put the pieces of this large, complicated puzzle of events together into a synthesis, demonstrating the functioning of trade and credit networks, as well as the diffusion of mobilizations and the trajectory of the growing political participation of provincial Muslim populations vis-a-vis the course increasing involvement in imperial politics and in the Ottoman economy. Now, I would just say a few words about our methodology. So our idea is that the project should treat the subject in its regional, imperial, and Mediterranean dimensions. So at the local level, our goal is to analyze the different conditions which prompted the formation of Janissary networks in each investigated area, along with the economic and political developments they triggered inside their host societies. At the imperial level, we want to juxtapose the various cases of such networks by highlighting the common patterns and differences in their way of operation. We investigate their interconnectedness in both economic and political terms and evaluate the relations they developed with Ottoman non-Muslims, with the empire's capital, and of course its central administration. And finally, at the Mediterranean level, we try to examine the impact the Janissary activity had on the European financial and diplomatic institutions in the region, compare the economic and political strategies developed by both in the common early modern Mediterranean environment, and investigate their overlapping fields of competition and collaboration. One problem, however, is that Janissaries were literally everywhere, and thus the scope of our research would be enormous if we were to examine every location where Janissary activity was prevalent. So in this framework, 4 cities have been chosen as ideal case studies, not only because they were in the forefront of the empire's commercial activity, but also because they acted as direct channels for the transfer of information, people, and ideas between both a great number of Ottoman financial and political centers, including Istanbul, that is, and between the Ottoman Empire and the rapidly expanding in terms of financial and political power European states. Furthermore, owing to their frontier status attributed by the Ottoman state to many of its Mediterranean, Danubian, and Black Sea provinces, there was a large concentration of Janissary units in many of them, a fact that favored the development of powerful centers of Janissary activity, of communication, and constant exchange of people between them. Now, as far as the use of archival material is concerned, our research is largely based on sources from a number of archives in Turkey, Bulgaria, Greece, France, England, Russia, Ukraine, Egypt, Algeria, and Tunisia. So for their study, the collected data are being fed into an open access relational database, which is hosted at the project's website and gives us the opportunity to record all sorts of information related to sources, individuals, properties, transactions, etc. So far, we have recorded around 1,200 sources. And the idea is to use this database not only as a tool that will help historians easily search for and retrieve information on Janissary networks, but also to effectively map this information in a dynamic way, to be able to visualize the data included in it, to instantly create charts, statistics, and so on. So apart from the database, other deliverables of the project include the creation of an online survey of published primary and secondary sources, a number of publications, among which a main monograph and 3 peer-reviewed collective volumes in open access form, a PhD dissertation, the organization of 4 workshops and 1 international conference, which will take place in 2024 in Rethymno, and last but not least, our website, which is already functional, although still under development. So following this introduction, I will now leave the floor to Aysel, so that she can present a part of her own research in the project. Now let me just change the PowerPoint. All right, so here we go. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting us. It's a good occasion to be with you. Thanks, Baki and Christine. I'm very happy to be part of this important project and work with very distinguished colleagues. Since the Janissary revolts, their socio-economic networks, as well as the rank and file of the Janissary Corps, are fields of my own research. It's very exciting for me to be part of the Janet project, as it opens new perspectives and new data for all of us. I contribute to the present project by making research on the social and economic and the political Janissary networks of the port cities of the Danube and the Black Sea zone. And together with Ifan, actually, we work as a team. As you may see from the screen, there is a huge list of archival sources that serve us as the material for the database. Among these sources, there are some cases like şikayet, the registers of complaints, ahkam or mühimme, the registers of important affairs that cover empire-wide cases. But there are some more specific defters which are directly related to the core areas that I and Irfan study. Among them, the court registers of within Silistre, Rusçuk, Sofia are of special importance and provide crucial information on the familial connections, commercial and credit relations, its investment patterns, as well as the property ownership and the local networks of the Janissaries. Another directly related register group is the Özü Silistre Ahkam registers. They are very rich in terms of the references to the Janissaries. And I currently work on these registers, which have a total of 49 defters, the earliest one going back to the mid-18th century. So far, I have studied 6 defters from the same series. The cases mentioned there in these defters are similar to the court registers, but by the Özü Ahkam, by the Ahkam registers, it is more possible to follow a final decree on a specific issue and to follow the Janissaries not only individually, but also collectively. Actually, even though I say Özü and Silistre, or the registers say Özü and Silistre Ahkam registers, the cases mentioned in the registers cover a huge geography extending from Silistre, Özü, Edirne, Kefe, Burgaz, the Principality of Wallachia and Moldova, Köstence, Akkerman. So it's a huge geography extending from present-day Bulgaria, let's say, to as far as almost Istanbul. Anyway, in the 18th and the 19th centuries, some parts of this geography turned into a frontier region and became the scene of ongoing wars either with Russia or the Austro-Hungarian Empire, or sometimes both. The fortresses of Hotin, Bender, Vidin, Ibrahim became the main defense points of Ottoman frontier, which led to an increase in the number of the soldiers. So the stationing of the soldiers in these fortresses and the movement of the imperial armies back and forth during the campaigns caused not only the militarization of the societies of these regions, it also led to the localization and the so-called esnafization process of the military groups themselves, especially the Janissaries. Therefore, we see that the Janissaries gradually became a crucial component of the social and economic life of the regions under study. So what we are talking about is this is an old Ottoman map from the archives. So what we are talking about is a region surrounded by the fortresses, garrison cities, plus the principalities of Eflak and Bodan, or Wallachia and Moldova. The principalities were 2 tributary provinces located in the northern part of the Danube, and they are usually called as Memleketin, twin provinces in the Ottoman sources. Categorically, they had a privileged status similar to Transylvania, Tunisia, Algeria, or the Crimea. By the mid-16th century, in line with the firm establishment of the Ottoman suzerainty in the Balkans and the Black Sea, the Danubian region and the Black Sea region, these trade zones were gradually close to the international economy, turned into a reserved trade zone for the Ottoman subjects until the late 18th century. By that time, the Ottoman policy of provisioning its capital needs of the army and the navy through with the help of the private merchants, trade associations, or the official buyers had already settled down. Following the Ottoman hegemony in the region, Ottoman merchants from various ethnic backgrounds, including the Armenians, the Moldavians, Wallachians, or the Greek, played a crucial role in the lively trading networks, not only as producers, but also as carriers or the traders. Actually, the less studied and known cases, the Muslim activities of the Muslim merchants in the region. So the material that we have studied so far strongly suggests that the Muslim merchants were very active at the imperial and regional trade of the this zone, less active in the international trade, and the Janissaries were an important participant or component of this trade network. Our research also revealed that the Janissaries had very intense credit and commercial connections in the regions. First of all, among themselves, with the other Muslim population of the region, but also with the non-Muslims of the same region. The Janissaries were particularly active at the imperial trade, and indeed the availability of tremendous and continual demand from an early metropolis such as Istanbul have encouraged some of these Janissaries to join imperial trade networks, either as traders or carriers. We know that they sometimes invested in land and livestock, not only in the places around their garrisons, but also the principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia. Of course, we shouldn't forget that even though they acted as traders, other kinds of economic investments, we are talking about paramilitary groups, and sometimes they could and did abuse their superior position in their relations, not only vis-a-vis the Muslims, but also especially with the non-Muslims. And this, especially their violations in the principalities, we can prove through the cases that we have studied, damaged the provisioning of the Istanbul. So the Ottoman authorities, motivated partly by their provisionalist and fiscalist concerns, but also with the welfare of the non-Muslim population of the principalities, initially tried to expel these unruly Janissaries, especially the criminal ones from the principalities. But in the long run, they employed a lasting strategy by restricting the Muslim commercial activities within the principalities to a certain number of people. And thanks to these regulations, actually, we have an idea about the identity of these people. And again, thanks to these privileges, the licensed Muslim merchants, Muslim Janissary merchants of the region obtained exclusive trading rights in the principalities. And this is some of the licensed merchants. You see that you see their business partners if they are mentioned, and their regiments, and the number of the merchants from the region. Thanks.
Thank you, Aysel. And I hope you can hear as well. We're still at Izmir, like we have a workshop at the time right now, and I'm not sure about the connection. So thank you very much. And now we will proceed with Irfan Koktash. He will talk about his part in the framework of the project.
Thank you, Yanis. Thank you. And I wish also thank to Baki Hoja and Professor Filio for inviting us. I actually, yes, the Aysel already mentioned the Danubian zone and its importance for the Janissary networks. And I want to talk about indeed about the geography that we are talking about and its general characteristics, and also the role of this geography in shaping the Janissary networks. Um, Throughout the early modern period, indeed, the Ottoman center, not only the Ottoman center, even the Habsburg authorities, try to actually draw a clear line between southern Danubian area and also the principalities. Even for we have a number of imperial orders sent from Istanbul to ban to actually the transfer of people, peasants, and also goods from Wallachia to the southern Danube, or vice versa. And also the Habsburgs, all right, in their actually a very short rule, even in the Oltenia and in the early 18th century, tried to do the same thing. So that's why, indeed, but they were not indeed successful. And what we are talking about is a very permeable, fluid, actually, geography. When we're talking about the Janissaries, Vidinous Janissaries, so even early 18th century, the most of the Vidinous Janissaries indeed established chiefliks. So that is the large estates, not actually around around the southern Danube, but mostly in Wallachia, mostly in Oltenia, and even actually reach the deeper hinlands of the Muntenia, called as Eflak Kebir in Ottoman sources. So, when we look at my general actually questions regarding this region, I put within at the center of this actually permeable geography. You know that when we look at the scholarship, even the Bulgarian and the Turkish scholarship on Vidin, not surprisingly, we see a depiction of a region with a total chaos. It is quite understandable because, you know, the Vidin witnessed together with Niš and Lom, so the area indeed stretching up to Belgradchik. So this is the area that witnessed huge series of rebellions, peasant revolts in the mid-19th century. And throughout the second half of 19th century, the Ottoman state actually had to try to solve it. So it is the heartland of the so-called Ottoman agrar problem, or the agrar question. So that's why the understanding of the Janissary activities in the early modern period here will automatically link us, or will enable us to bridge, right, the 18th century dynamics and the 19th century indeed struggles, conflicts in the region. And the narrative and the story indeed started with the war against the Holy War in the late 17th century, which led a rapid increase in the number of Janissaries in the region. Yes, before that date, we have a small garrison, and we had Janissary presence in the Vidin, and also the area up to the Rusa. But that was indeed a triggering moment. And you know, maybe remember there was fantastic studies, Rosista's fantastic studies on the area. So this led a very dynamic and dramatic change when the emotions, even I call it the zeitgeist of early 18th century, the non-Muslim presence became became under attack, because most of the Janissaries actually are coming from the front lines, and they they describe themselves as the full carrier of the Islam, or the Islamic actually war against the infidels. So these zeitgeists indeed overlapped with an imperial interest to structuralize the area as a frontier zone, as a military zone. So from the very beginning of the 18th century, the Ottoman center sent several orders to the region to, indeed, it's very important to transform the existing property regime. They guaranteed the new the title deeds, the tapotemesicus of the new Janissaries, and fully cancelled actually the old one. And this process was accompanied by a huge penetration of Janissaries into urban sectors. Indeed, in Ottoman historiography, or even a Turkish, or in the historiography or the general historiography on the Arabic provinces, the Janissary activities in economic area, in economic domains, have been automatically linked to their activities in urban sectors. So it is again quite understandable because there are several city revolts, urban riots, particularly in the 18th century, and they continued in the early 19th century. And we know actually the famous characterization of the Janissarization of Esnaf and Esnafization of Janissaries. But we indeed know very little about the Janissaries' presence in the countryside. That's why the Vidin area, and also in general sense, the larger Danubian area, provides us a perfect laboratory. And from the very beginning of 18th century, Janissaries acted as tax farmers, and they developed quite sophisticated credit mechanisms. So these credit mechanisms sometimes were carried out collectively through ODAS, or the collective funds of the Janissaries. The people familiar with the modern Middle East history, so these actual system look very similar to Egyptian or the Turkish cases, like the Oyak, right? So it is a kind of collective fund. But here, together with this tax farming and the credit mechanisms, we also see a very, very large Janissary investments in the countryside. They were the holders of the large estates, chiefliks, and they constructed several storehouses, mills, and they indeed, when we look at the 18th century Janissary activities and their presence in the countryside, we must ask the question that what is the role of the Janissaries, the so-called road to the 19th century agrarian problem? Remember that the famous quotes or the famous analysis by Inalcik and Gandev about actually the historical roots of 19th century agrarian problem. So that they back to the 18th century, all right, or gospodarlık or the ağalık systems. So the Janissaries indeed played a very, very important role in shaping this system. But unlike what the historiography has usually suggested, this system created by Janissaries, or the system in which Janissaries acted as very important actors, was indeed not chaotic. They fully reflect a kind of flexibility of new kind of 18th century Miri land regime. And this Miri land regime actually opened investment opportunities for Janissaries in this area. And when we look at even the Janissaries' relations to the locals, again, unlike what has been suggested by the historiography, they could not be simply reduced into the duality between peasants and Janissaries. And we will plan actually next year's of the Janet to develop and to focus on these continuities and the ruptures of the Janissaries' presence in the countryside. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Irfan. And now we will proceed with Mert's presentation, Mert Sunar.
Thank you, Yannis. I would also thank Baki Tezcan and Christian for hosting this session. My part in this project is the main suicidal one. That is to say, dealing with the Istanbul Janissaries by myself. As we have given too much emphasis to Istanbul as Ottoman historians, probably this is the revenge of the provinces, giving me this task. Just joking. I mean, I'm aware of the hugeness of this task. I mean, dealing with Janissary economic and socio-political networks in Istanbul. And I think one way of dealing with this problem is advancing thematically, giving certain emphasis to certain themas. And as we all aware of the Janissary presence in crafts and certain trades. For example, one of the subjects, one of the emphasis I'm giving is the guild connections of the Janissaries, looking at the presence of Janissaries in the Istanbul guilds as administrative roles like wardens, yiğitbaşıs, etc., as ustas, and a second subject, if you will, is the credit networks of Janissary cash endowments. We know that each orta or each regiment actually runs these cash endowments, and they had very intense relations with the middle and low, quote unquote, lower strata of the society, giving them credits to small esnaf groups, non-Muslims, women even, and we have traces and evidence for that, especially after the auspicious event. The Mahmud II's government compiled frantically the terekes of the cash endowments. I mean, to how much extent they were successful after this chaotic event, after the executions and killing of these Janissaries, but still we have a considerable number of mud registers dealing with these terekes, and from these terekes we are aware of these relations, and I'm giving emphasis to that, and my own previous studies on the Janissaries of Istanbul during the Mahmud II's reign gave me some ammunition in that respect. So another probably emphasis that we are giving, or I'm giving in Istanbul, is the trade networks. I haven't quite started that yet, but my plan is to give somehow more emphasis to the region that Aysel and Irfan is working on, so we can establish some sort of relations with them. We can help each other on the Eflak and Boğdan principalities and their Janissary activities and Janissary role in that region, basically. I mean, we have, of course, plenty of resources in the Ottoman archives, too many classifications, too many registers to look at. But as I said, my own way of dealing it is giving certain emphasis to certain subjects. And of course, Istanbul as a capital, the Janissary presence was more noticeable in terms of their political connections, in terms of their social connections. And as the things went normal, ordinarily, we don't usually notice these sort of relations, these networks. So another way of looking at the things is focusing on the time of crisis, the time of rebellions, during which we have more information, involuntary information about the secret networks or relations between these groups. not finally, but we have also court records in which gives us more detail about the everyday life of the Janissaries in Istanbul. For example, today in the workshop, we were talking about I mean, despite the negative image of the Janissaries presented after the auspicious event by the Ottoman political elite, throughout the 18th and early 19th century, Janissaries were the ordinary and normal part of the Ottoman social and economic fabric. Looking at the court records gives us this sense. I mean, for example, studying court records, present us the Janissaries as, homeowners, leading members of their neighborhoods, being shuhudul hal most of the time, sometimes victims of crimes, sometimes perpetrators of the crimes, creditors, debtors, husbands, all kind of the stuff. And I think the court records will be a kind of an important leg in this study. That second part of my task is to supervise a team trying to index and analyze Janissary payroll registers. This is also a huge task. I mean, to give you an idea about what we are doing, let me show you some Excel templates. This is thanks to Yannis, mainly thanks to Yannis. It seems more in order now, more or less, but before that it was a kind of a mess. To give you some idea about these payroll registers, these are general payroll registers, thousands and more pages most of the time, listing Janissary garrisons, Janissaries in provinces, and as well as Janissaries in Istanbul. I previously worked a few of regimental registers in my dissertation, and I know how difficult it is. And I mean, working with the registers, payroll register, like sorry, I have to use it Turkish. I don't know the English. Like keçi boynuzu. I mean, you work and work and work. You get very few fruits from that. But I think thanks to the Yannis's database, we will get more from these payroll registers. And specifically the distribution of the quote-unquote regiments, ortas and jemaat, which regiment is where, which regiments were appointed, which province, etc. Even though these names and patronymic names create some sort of problem in the absence of surnames, we have many Ali bin Mehmet, Mehmet bin Mustafas, etc. But at least sometimes the registers gives us more about the origin of the Janissary, his rank, position, etc. I think this will give us an opportunity to pinpoint, the moments of certain Janissaries probably, and their function within the regiments. I mean, again, to give you an idea, this is basically the registers that we are dealing with in a way. So this is the kind of a second, supervising very bright, very skillful students who can read Siyakat. We have 3 members in our team, Hakan, Güldan, and Mehmet, and we are trying to index and analyze. We actually did 2 up till now. We are working on the 3rd one, and Yannis had great nightmares to correct our mistakes, and we're trying to make sense of our payroll registers. So this is basically my part in the project. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this presentation, Mert. I also have to say we're sorry that at some point we had to stand up, both me and Aysel and Irfan, but like the guards like from the university came here to tell us that the building is closing, so we panicked a little bit. Anyways, I think we resolved that. So anyway, so we're not leaving. So the floor is open for questions. I don't know, Baki, how are we going to do that? Or Christine, can somebody tell me? Are we going to use the chat? Do you have any protocol?
I think we could use both, because some people in the audience prefer writing questions on the chat and some people raise their hands. I'll leave it up to you. You can take questions as you go. I have some questions, but I would like other people to ask questions first. So and you might also have things to say about each other's presentations if you like, but Christine's hand is already up there.
All right. So Christine, the floor is to you. You can ask whatever you like.
Thank you. This is amazing.
Not too difficult questions.
No, I hope not. This is incredible. I'm so happy that you guys are doing this. And I just wondered if you could talk a little more about the Eflak and Boğdan piece, because obviously Janissaries weren't stationed north of the Danube. So what kind of trade, is it provisioning? I mean, that's what I've found. So, in my earlier research, have you found specific trade connections, or what kind of presence have you found north of the Danube in Eflak and Boğdan?
Actually, I and Irfan had previously wrote an article, a paper about it, especially the chiefs, and Irfan mentioned a little bit. But as we move on with the help of this project, we saw that especially the husbandry is very developed in the region. They have the beehives. They also, as I said, established chiefliks. So this is one region. The one part, I think, settled in the region permanently or temporarily as producers. But there is, our research reveals that some others were carriers, these goods to Kalas especially, because after the restrictions that I mentioned, most of them were not allowed to be there. So at Kalas, mostly the Muslim and the non-Muslim population met there. And when we look at the merchandise there, they were shipped to, of course, to Istanbul mostly. I think I found only one case which there was a Janissary having trade with Austria-Hungary, I think. Otherwise, it was mostly the Istanbul and the regional trade. Of course, in Istanbul, we see that it was the cheese, honey, and also some other animal-related sectors. There was one more, if I forgot, Kashkaval, other kinds of, other kind of cheese. Another, there is a huge group who were involved in the cattle drovers. These are mentioned as sürücü. And they had special permission to go into the inner parts of the Wallachia with the special permission, and they most of them passed the winter in the grazing lands in the region.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah.
So, any other questions? Anybody?
I have several questions. I'm going to ask one, and I hope that will. I want the audience to ask questions, and I see a hand there. I'm going to take my question back. Louis, please unmute yourself.
Yeah. First of all, thanks so much for. I enjoyed the talk very much. This is so far from what I do, actually, and I teach, of course, modern Middle East and late Ottoman history and Ottoman history. So we always start with Janissaries, and we get so confused, I think, from transformation to this period that we're talking to Muslims and not former Christians. But I had a question doing Ottoman Palestine, and we didn't talk too much about the Arab lands in it, and I'm more interested in general, and Merit, you somehow alluded to it, to the legacy of the Ottoman, I mean, of the Janissaries, and what happens to them after 1826, these networks and different things like that. So my first question would be, did they somehow, like, for example, in Egypt, when I'm hearing this, it sort of mirrors what I understand of Mamluk networks in Egypt to some extent. I mean, how much did these interests clash with Mamluks in Egypt? Were they able to at all, you know, take hold there? And then I would look at Ottoman Palestine, even during you know, Ibrahim Pasha's occupation of the regions. How much did this affect these networks there, if they were there already? And this is after the auspicious events, but you know, the legacy of them. So that's what, if anyone can answer that question, or give me some, you know, direction to go into to read more about this, it'd be great. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Louis. And also, we've met in the past, like many years ago in Istanbul, I just remembered. Anyway, so unfortunately, our member of the team who is working on Egypt is not with us today, Abdul Menan Altuntaş. So, you know, unfortunately, and because these are very elaborate and very specific questions, it's very difficult, I guess, for anyone like among us to answer this, either me, Aysel, Mert, or Irfan. I'm not sure if we are qualified to do that. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but you know, like this, the thing with the projects is that it is so big, and like we have so many areas involved, and some you know, research is at different stages according to the area. So, for instance, Menan started a little bit later than the rest of us. So, you know, like we're trying to bring it to the same level. Unfortunately, I don't have these answers, Louis. I'm really sorry.
Thanks for trying at least. It's pondering in your mind. Yeah. So the next question would be that maybe, what about the legacy of these Janissaries in different regions? You know what I mean? Because we learned about 1826, and it's like, oh, they were wiped out. Janissaries were wiped out, and you know, even in Istanbul, and either in other regions, you know, once, you know, later on in the mid 19th century, how do they develop after the auspicious events?
Right. So this is a very, very interesting question indeed. And I think Mert also has some answers, because in his thesis has dedicated quite some pages, quite a few pages on the issue, to the issue. But I also can, because my dissertation was on the Janissaries of Crete. So what I see is that there is, in the case of Crete at least, there was a collapse of like the credit networks that supported most of the artisans of the three big cities of the island. And of course, that was a terrible blow for like the entire Muslim community there. So what they did is, I mean, there was a lot of them were recruited in the Asakiri Mansoure Corps, but the problem is that they lost their privileges, which was that the most important part of like a Janissary affiliation. So basically, they could not have the protection that they used to. They could not form the same networks. They did not have impunity. They did not have, you know, like a special jurisdiction. So all of these aspects that made the Janissary connection so strong and so important. So basically, I would say that, of course, this is not the same, the only reason, and I don't want to oversimplify, but I will say that it had a great impact on both the political and the economic position of Muslims in Crete. And Janissaries, of course, would be remembered by Muslims as, you know, like an institution that supported them for many years, and by Christians as, you know, like a menace, a threat that had to be somehow it had to get out of the way. So yeah, there is indeed a lasting impact of the institution even after 1826. And Mert, would you like to talk a little bit about Istanbul?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the Janissaries in Istanbul were more unfortunate than the other parts. Also, this is a question related to the limits of the Mahmud II's government. For example, we know that in some regions like Baghdad and other areas, there were still Janissaries around in 1830s. There was this huge rebellion in Bosnia, but in some part, even the Mahmud II's governments were surprised that they did it so easily. There was some resistance in central Anatolia. For example, in Erzurum, Janissaries became Asakir-i in one night. Of course, this doesn't mean they gave up their identities. They secretly kept it, etc. But in Istanbul, as Yannis pointed out, artisans and craftsmen, in a way, lost their protectors. They were now more vulnerable to the whims of Sultan Mahmud II and his financial policies. For example, to state the obvious, after the elimination of the Janissaries, Mahmud II could do huge amounts of debasement to the Ottoman currency. Also, there are more new taxes for the artisans and crafts, etc. But still, I mean, many of the Janissaries, as long as they hidden their identities, keep existing, there was some amount of kind of a unhappiness about the Mahmud II's policies. For example, we know that among the public, people were still mocking the Asakir-i, their drills and all these other stuff. But mainly, we can say, as Yannis said, the most part of the Ottoman Empire, Janissaries could no longer pose a threat to the Mahmud II's government.
Thank you, Mert. Baki, would you like to ask your questions now?
I received one question via chat. I'm going to read that question, and then Özlem's hand is up. Özlem will be after me. This question comes from Erkin Bulut, and here is what he says. I would like to ask a question to all presenters. Are there any specific sources they encountered during the project that can be taken as somewhat ideological expression belong to the Janissaries as a political and economic group? Or did they encounter some certain leaders, maybe some sort of representatives of the Janissaries in any occasions? Thank you.
Would somebody like to answer this? Or shall I go ahead and... All right, yeah. Okay, so of course there's the ideology. Yes, it's something that is quite traceable, especially in the beginning of the 19th century. The sources become much more revealing about this, about the fact that Janissaries become more and more and want to claim the position of actually the representatives of the people in their own the districts, in their own provinces. So it's very interesting. For instance, again, I'm going to talk about the case of Crete. The fact that when the Mahmudian regime actually tried to send to the island some disciplinarian governors in order to suppress the Janissary political activity there from the 1810 to 1826. Basically, these governors found like a huge resistance, and the Janissaries would openly say that either you have to, because there was, for instance, in one case there was an orta, a Janissary regiment, that they wanted to send to another fortress to exile. So all of the regiments went to the governor and said, you either have to, either you will not exile anybody, or you will exile all of us and the Muslim people of Kandiye altogether. So that this kind of claims that, you know, we are the people, so become like more and more evident in the beginning of the 19th century. And it's interesting that this is also, this fact starts to be more recognized by the Ottoman administration as well in the beginning of the 19th century. So by the late, until the late 18th century, the Ottoman administration would try to, you know, distinguish the unruly Janissaries from the rest of the Janissaries. So they would just say that, you know, we are just going after these unruly soldiers that revolt in the provinces. But what I see in the 1810s, 1820s, is that they start actually explicitly saying that, you know, like the power of the Janissaries is actually the people, the Muslim people of like the province. So they do not hide it anymore, so to speak. So of course there's ideology. Of course it is obvious that they're trying to be representatives of like large groups in many cities in the empire. And I think that this also takes place in other regions. I don't know if somebody else would like to comment on this.
Maybe for the leadership, when the Mahmud II's government started its preparation for the elimination of Janissaries in 1810s, 1820s, it went after the mid-ranking officers, mainly Mütevellis, Odabaşıs, etc. These were their main target. And this gives us an idea about the leadership of the Janissaries. And we have other evidence from different sources during the rebellions. We know that these cadre, the Mütevellis, Odabaşıs, etc., played an important role in this respect. After eliminating these so-called ringleaders, then Mahmud II's government advanced into next level, introducing the new order reforms with another name, with Eskincisi, basically. So this gives an idea about the leadership, probably. But we need a little bit more detailed studies on the subject.
There was a hand up by Özlem Çayken. Özlem, are you there?
I am. Hi there. Thank you for these very interesting presentations. Actually, I have a question. It might sound very stupid due to my little knowledge about the Janissaries, probably, but I feel like I've listened to Yanis's project before, and also about his creed research. And it sounds to me that when we think of the Janissaries, we used to, at least, think about them only as military actors. And here, I think this project shows us that there is a lot more to them. And this brings me to my question about the 18th century. Is a question of stratification, in fact. I'm wondering whether we could think about them as a middle class, as an 18th century middle class of the Ottoman Empire. And yes, I mean, they are not there anymore in the 19th century, but as credit providers, as all this commercial network, and Mehmet Mertsunar's mentioning of their position in the community, it sounds to me we could perhaps think of them as the middle class in the 18th century. What would you say about that? And I mean, this would also give us actually a different perspective, perhaps, and different narrative of the 18th century economic life of the Ottoman Empire, I believe.
Would somebody like to answer this question?
Yeah, well, I can say something, Yanis. Indeed, such kind of characterization of Janissaries was put forward by Donald Quartet. So for the 18th and early 19th century, he rightfully, I think, pointed to the role of the Janissaries as the carriers of the voices from the middle class and the lower classes. But we should be very careful, actually, in such type of classifications, I think. First of all, in the last workshop, we indeed discussed even the stratification within Janissaries. There was a huge degree of stratification and hierarchy within Janissaries. I'm talking for Rusem and within. And there were very rich Serdengeçli's, yes, they were very attractive for us. They extended credits to even the small villages in Bodan and Eflak. But there are also hundreds, thousands of Janissaries in probate records who died only with a single cloth. So it is not easy to actually put them into one package. But in general sense, I actually agree with the late Donald Quarter's characterization of the role of the Janissaries, a kind of baffling actually group, all right, a middling group that prevent the state elites actually the encroachment on the rights and the interests of the lower classes. So I agree with that, but we should always careful even this stratification within this group itself.
Yeah, I would also agree with Irfan on this. Yeah.
No, I was also thinking not just about the Janissaries, but also about the pseudo Janissaries and the local Janissaries. In fact,
why didn't you participate? We talked a lot today about the Janissaries in most parts of empire, and also we made also a case study on Adana about the Janissaries and the active Janissaries. Yes, I agree with Irfan, and our findings also show that we cannot talk about, I mean, one single group as or represent them as or consider them as the middle class, but because there is many stratification, and I show some cases from Adana. There was guys dying with only 10 kurush or 10 kurush, but also some had more than 2,000, and much more rich people. And some were parts of the political elite. We know their background, military background. Some were Serdar and then became the Ayan. We have many cases. So they were very active in local politics, but there were other guys who were serving as servants. And they are also represented as the pretenders to Janissarism. Yeah, it's clear that either they were pretenders or the active Janissaries, but they were servants, depending on other people. So, yes, they are probably the middle class, but I mean, there is a great hierarchy, it seems, between them. Thanks, Özlem.
Jeannie, yeah, Virginia Aksan had a question. Virginia, would you like to ask it yourself, or should I read it?
Well, sometimes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
I'm speaking to the people in my conference cam. I'm in a friend's house at the moment. Go ahead, maybe read it, and then I'll expand on it if need be.
Sure, I can do that. No problem. She says, do we have further evidence in this new research about official Janissary pay? For example, the dissolution or seizing of timars and or the collection of the jizya to the garrisons outside Istanbul?
So I want to be sure that I understood the question.
Right. I can probably elaborate on it. In the Russian wars, the 68 to 74, they talk about to actually the second one too, to all the way into the 80s. They talk about wagon loads of coins arriving from Istanbul. So there was still an effort, I think, to be paying the Janissaries in the old-fashioned way. As you put out on, as you show from having read the registers, you've done such marvelous work on. But it does seem to me that part of what the Janissaries are doing is taking the jizya money and turning it into the precisely to the agricultural investments that they're doing on, as you've also brilliantly told us. I tried to work this out when I was working on the Janissaries. It is excessively, as Merit told us, difficult. But I do think it would be of great interest in terms of the way in which the entire society, local society, is enriched by this. If it's coming straight out of Istanbul's, the Sultan's, in effect, pocket. I mean, out of the central state, which we don't, we don't understand it as having a banking system, but this is creating one that actually does enrich the Muslim community. And I do think, I've just made this connection that after 1826, you take out all of those networks, you leave all these holes in these cities for the fights that go on throughout the 19th century, precisely over the property of the outlying cities of the empire. And that includes the Arab world. Sorry, did I put a lot in one statement there?
No. But I just have to thank you very much for this question. This is very interesting, and I think that I cannot answer it just by myself, so I will need some help. What I have to say,
none of us can. That's the problem.
But what I have to say as to to the question concerning the question if that was coming out of Sultan's pockets, definitely that this is the answer. I mean, what happened was there was this elaborate system of distributing payments by taking it from provinces and giving it to other provinces. So this is a very complicated system that had to do basically with keeping the hands of the Janissaries off local resources. All right, so you don't want these imperial actors, because they were imperial actors, right? Even when they were completely localized, they were considered by the center to be, the representatives of the central administration of the Sultan himself. So they didn't want them to, interfere into the taxes of the provinces they were based in, because that would, cause some kind of a catastrophe, in the system. But eventually, by the mid 18th century, the system was so elaborate that it turned out to be, a failure. Not only because the whole Janissary organization was completely decentralized, with 3/4 of it being based in the provinces, so it became even more difficult for all of these payments to be distributed from one place to the other, but also for other reasons. Also because of the fact that the core was becoming bigger and bigger, and at some point Janissaries started claiming their saliye. So basically the taxes that were supposed to go to Istanbul, they saliye of their own areas, all right, as payment. So they said, this is money that should go to Istanbul. So it's the same thing, right?
Right, it's going there. It's going to come back to us.
So at some point, Istanbul had no choice, because the revolts were so many that they, in the end, they just had to, to go for it. They would just say, okay, take the money, just don't revolt. All right, but that actually meant that in the end, by the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century, actually, Janissaries not only are localized, but they also have control of the resources, to the point that in some provinces, you see them they just go without asking the defterdar. They go into the, into the local treasury, and they just take the money without asking. So, there's an evolution. That's what I'm trying to say, that the system becomes so complicated that in the end, localization of the core also affects these resources and where they, although they're supposed to be, the Sultan's money, eventually they're just Janissary money. Would somebody like to add something to this?
Maybe we can add that with the auspicious event, the Mahmud II's government got rid of a huge internal debt because the Janissary pays coming like 5 years in arrears.
Right.
So by abolishing the cause, I mean, the Mahmud II's government overnight got rid of such huge amount of, debt, internal debt in a way.
Right. I hadn't thought about that. That's a great idea. Right.
I mean, and also, before the auspicious event, they guaranteed that they are going to continue paying these esamet, honor these esames, but in the chaotic environment, they did not honor that. They abolished most of them, and probably many of the people were afraid to go and claim these esames.
Yeah, sure.
Right. The ones they did, they give them half, quarter, or something like that.
Right.
All right, Baki, you still haven't asked your question.
I can wait because I'd like to have a lot of participation. I prefer that better. Osman Akar sent a question to me, and then there's another question that was sent to everyone. I'm going to read Osman Akar's question first. I think we kind of covered this, but let me read it. My question is to all speakers. Striped from their networks and economic privileges, can we name this group as déclassé? And did this group play any role in political developments in the 19th and 20th centuries? I guess Mert and Yanni, you already responded to this in the sense that you mentioned once they were gone, some of them became Asakir-i Mansure, but they didn't quite have the privileges. Were they able to play any roles in that new capacity as Asakir-i Mansure? Maybe. I mean, might be not quite possible for you to answer as you're looking into more economic things, but let me ask anyway. Any thoughts on this?
I think Mahmud II's government at great pains to ensure this is not happening. I mean, they were so paranoid, they were so afraid of the Janissaries that they tried to erase all these signs. But I'm not sure after a while, maybe again they had to establish a similar kind of system for Asakir-i Mansure, like cash wakfs or orta sandığı, etc. But we need to look at in more detail. But my guess is that it is very difficult for Asakir-i Mansure to play the role that Janissaries at once played.
Thank you.
Actually, it was also in the Kanunname that was issued, like the regulations for the functioning of the Asakir-i Mansure. They would just like explicitly mention that, look, now you're under the governor, like under the governor of each province. So, like it's his decision if something will happen to you or not. And, so basically they had no choice to act as, like these imperial actors, as these people who could, be a different pole, so to speak, like in the local administration, that, like they didn't have that weight anymore. Okay, so was there another question, Baki?
Yes, there is a question from Anne Kierkegaard, and I think she says you may read out the question. So that I am just curious, what role did religion, Bektashi order as a Shia hybrid, play in the socioeconomic structure you have described, for instance, regarding credits? Did that play a role?
One thing that we know for sure is that Mahmud II, right after confiscating Janissary funds, or even before that, I'm not sure, but like at that moment, also tried to confiscate as much Bektashi property as possible and to suppress their networks. But that doesn't mean that, like Bektashis did not have a legacy that was important for the people. Actually, today, Mert gave us a very nice example from the interrogation archives, registers after the auspicious incident, like in 1826, the abolition of the Janissary Corps. There was this instance of Bektashi plot against the Mahmudian government, which followed the destruction of the Janissary Corps. Mert, would you like to just tell the story, because it's interesting?
Yeah, but first of all, I think we have to emphasize that not all the Janissaries were Bektashis.
Of course.
Yes, Bektashis played an important role in the Janissary Corps. Some of the immigrants from Anatolia had this Bektashi leanings. We have examples in which Bektashi Babas played role in the rebellions, you know, waving the standard of rebellion, etc. Of course, the reason why Mahmud II's government went after the Bektashis immediately after the Janissaries were this Bektashi connection. I think there was something relating to credit. I mean, with Bektashi beliefs, with the credits, etc. But I'm not very sure about the question.
My interpretation is that she was trying to see whether in the credit networks can we as evidence of maybe perhaps let's do business only with Bektashis or do business only with certain people. Are there people preferred over others? Is there any evidence in that regard?
They did business with everyone, non-Muslims, women, anyone. I mean, there is not such a maybe they preferred their comrades over civilians, but still they did business with everyone, as far as I observed.
But I have to say that business with their own comrades were in better terms for the people who were getting the loans, right? So I recently found this very interesting regiment of register of Vakıf, which it has all the accounts, and basically you can see that there is there are the loans given with istirba, with how would you call that? Interest, all right? And then you have the people who would get loans without interest. And of course, all the guys who would get loans without interest would be Janissaries from the same orta.
But they get interest from the Janissaries apart from their own ortas. So the credit, I think, interest changes from 10% to 12%, and goes as far as 30%. If I saw several cases about this, and if he's a very strong local figure or a important figure from, Janissary officer from Istanbul, he can impose as much as credit as he can. Of course, if you have a slightly inferior status, like being a non-Muslim, vis-a-vis a Janissary commander or a poor peasant, you are disadvantaged. So he can impose as much as he can. Many cases of this. Yes.
But the thing is that, you didn't have to be a Bektashi to get one of these.
And we cannot know, of course, whether a person
of course,
is Bektashi.
It's really difficult to spot anyways.
We have to say that we don't know whether all these guys were Janissaries, because it says Mehmet Pasha from Özi, Ahmet Pasha from Vidin Nesli. We assume that these were all Janissaries. Yeah.
But in the credit market, indeed, not being a Bektashi or not, being from the same Jemaat and Duluk gave a huge privilege. It's certain. All the partners, the majority of the partners were from the same Jemaat and the Duluk, and even the credit networks overlapped with this partnership.
Kierkegaard just wrote, the Shia traditions are socio-political in the sense that they function as welfare providers. We see this in Iran and currently in Lebanon with Hezbollah. Religion is the foundation for being engaged in welfare and credits, not for who receives support. I was just curious if you have studied this aspect, if it can be said to exist also for the Janissaries. my sense from what you said so far is that that is not quite there. But you should say, you should give the response here.
When we were talking about the outlook of these political elite to the Janissaries, and it seems that from the late 18th, when they begin to lose the wars, the imperial elite starts saying that these are the Taife Bektaşiyan, more repeatedly. Otherwise, in earlier periods, you don't know. I mean, this is being a Bektaş is like a kind of accusation. That's why we begin to see them with such accusations more frequently after that. Before that, there is no such a accusation, I think.
But as far as the Vakıf and the pious side of like these loans, I mean, of course, as in like any vakfiye, you would see that like there's some kind of religious justification, and so like although like a lot of people, not only soldiers but also women, would just leave their property to the Janissary funds. And they would always try to justify it in a like pious way. They would say like there should be like a prayer like in the barracks of like this particular regiment, where the fund goes to like so that or there should be like food given, that there should be food that they would give like to the soldiers. It's I don't know, like it's day of I don't know, like it's first day of the month or something like that. So you have this idea that we're providing because it's a service to God, to like it's a pious thing. Of course we have this, but like if somebody just like interprets it, of course what Baki just said is right. I mean, it's all business, if you ask me.
Thank you. I think the fundamental difference there is in among the Shia in Iran or Hezbollah in Lebanon, we have people born into that faith, whereas Janissaries are not necessarily born into Bektashi. It's not a fundamentally religious group. It is a group of people who, once they become Janissaries, form a connection with the Bektashi tariqa. So in that sense, it's a little different. They come from different, more diverse backgrounds. There is, you mentioned Waqf, Yanni, and there is a question from Randy to everyone. Wonderful program, he says. And then a question, please. Is anyone working on the Waqf established by the Janissaries? Clearly, you are working on them. Randy, do you want to ask something more specific? Because it looks like Yanni is working on the Waqfs. Maybe he can tell you more about what you want to hear about, if you're still there.
Hi. Yeah, I'm still here. Nice to see everybody.
Please.
Well, it's just that, I've been working on the Waqf for a long time, not specifically on Janissary created Waqf, but however, in relation to some of the Waqf created in Damascus during the Ottoman period, there is mention of Janissaries, either renting properties, etc. But I never came across a document which showed that a Janissary actually created a Waqf there. So I'm wondering, has anybody come across this kind of, I mean, except for the published material, what about the research right now? Thank you.
At least in my material, I see Janissaries like creating Waqfs all the time, but this is also, it has to do with social status and so on, but like a lot of Janissaries also just like leave their properties in the form of Waqfs to, like the funds of their regiments. But, you also see like wealthy Janissaries, for instance, creating a Waqf that is for their own family. So you have like all kinds of variations.
Yeah, but are they specifically identified as, do they self-identify as Janissary? I mean, they carry that title in the Waqf, in the Waqfiyah, is a question.
Yeah, well, not always, but like many times, yeah, it seems that they carry that. Also, as I said, like when they when we have a vakfiye, which is about like a certain amount of money or some kind of property that goes to the regiment, then, like you can see that they try to stress their connection with the regiment. But in the other type of, like vakfiyes, when just somebody, like creates a vakf for his own family or something like that, then, like, of course, it's not that important and they don't stress it as much.
Okay, well, that would be, if I may, in the database, that would be helpful for researchers like myself and other ones who work on these kind of documents to, if they self-identify as or if they're identified as a member of the Janissary, that would be interesting for us, because we have a program in Aix-en-Provence and with other scholars working on Waqf documents, and we have never come across a Waqfiyya or a Waqf created by a Janissary named as such or identified as such. Maybe they're there, but we don't know that because they don't identify themselves as such, whether it's a family Waqf or whether it's a Waqf Khairi or other. So, that would be really interesting for us if that's included, that material is included in your database.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is great. This is exactly the kind of conversation I was hoping we would get from these meetings, where some people who work on something in one part of the world and then some others who work on the other part, and they get connected. So I guess now you can perhaps exchange some information. That would be great. Since I don't see any other hands, I'm going to ask one of the questions, and it is sort of a more bigger type of question. Irfan's presentation and others too mentioned how land ownership was getting çiftliks by Janissaries. I work with a graduate student who works on çiftlik formation in the 17th century, so I'm a little bit familiar on this. So there is some sort of privatization of land going on, it looks like, in the Balkans, at least in the evidence that you provided. And the evidence comes from areas where Muslim population was not necessarily the majority. So it looks as if sort of the lands owned by Muslims is growing as the Janissaries are taking a more active role in the countryside. I'm especially interested in that part, if I understood this correctly. And then the next point from there, can we then connect this development with perhaps kind of a maybe later kind of growth, gradual growth of Muslim? Is there a way to connect sort of Janissaries as representative of the Muslim population becoming landowners? Does that create resentment? Because it's a little different than if there is a timar held by a Muslim, but the peasants are still peasant farmers, is one thing. Whereas if now there's a çiftlik and the Christian peasants are turning into laborers of land, then that is another thing. Do you see anything like this going on?
How many times do we have? I can start. Maybe I will add many things. First of all, we should be very careful again for the terminology. And my research into the Danubian area shows that, and I think the ISENS research on Thessaly shows that the concept of privatization is very, very problematic. The use of the privatization. Maybe I actually show it. I will show it in my tomorrow's presentation, that Miri land regime is never actually replaced with another one. It is very flexible. It is very actually on play. It was a very strong reference point adapted to the 18th century realities. And that's, yes, this is exactly the situation, Baki Hocam, because the peasants were fully Christians, fully, almost fully in some regions, and landowners were Muslims. And it is very interesting because in 18th century, the majority of the disputes between the majority of the land disputes did not emerge between Janissaries and peasants, but within the Janissaries. The Janissary families, Janissary actually, even from the same Jamaat, even from the Janissary as, compete each other to build and erect some buildings. So it is the genesis of chieflicization along the Danube. Constructing a mill, constructing a ambar storehouse is a starting point, and there is a new notion actually emerging in Vidin, which is a very similar to what happened in Syria in that period. So that's why I think we can connect so desperate worlds in the Ottoman historiography, that is the Rumelia to the Arab provinces. So the concept of the upper tenant land, ona tabi olan arazi. So in practice and in the market, upper tenant land is traded together with buildings, like with a lump sum actual value. But all records were very, very cautious that these opportunity lands were miri, not milk. The buildings were actually milk. And this is one of the hard questions that the Ottoman statesmen and the legals tried to solve throughout the 19th century. And what happened indeed, they solved it only in the beginning of the 20th century. So it is a very complex indeed issue. I'm just talking about on the Danubian side and also the Western Danubian side. So the region around Lom, Belgradchik, and Vidin. So the system in Silistria and in Russia is quite different. But in general sense, yes, the peasants were Christians, but the landowners were indeed the Janissaries. And the Janissaries had claimed this right and took this right with title deeds, and they bought them from peasants. So it's a very normal action. And when the Janissaries even built some mills or etc. on the common land, so that is a very critical issue, Mera, not Chayir, but Mera, then even the other Janissaries defended the peasants. To say that it is actually this Mera, the common land, since former times belong to the community or the village. So this is a very, very multi-layered kaleidoscopic picture in the countryside. So yes, in majority of the cases they were Christians, but the relationship is actually revolves from patronage to conflict. You know, it's very complex.
So you're saying, oh, please go ahead. No,
I said.
Go ahead.
There is another side of the same issue. I mean, we forget that the Janissaries had very serious privileges and try to get some more, of course, if you have power. Now, we are discussing these issues with Irfan. I mean, we try to get some insights from Balkans, also from the Anatolia, and we saw that the taxation, overpopulation, any kind of pressure leads to migration, both in Anatolia and in the Balkans. The Balkans has more advantage. They can move back to the higher lands involved in husbandry, but in both places in Anatolia and Balkans, they usually seek shelter in the chiefliks, which are run by the Janissaries, and these are known the askeri chieflik. It's a great mystery, but I saw the case in Sivas, Bursa, in Özde Silistria, and in other places. So what's the advantage? Why what if they run away? If they go these places, they don't, the Janissaries, I mean, if he's a Janissary, I mean, the holder of the estate is Janissary, he encourages and prevents the tax collectors to come to his chieflik and collect taxes even if he, no matter whether he is Muslim or not, if the peasant may be Muslim or non-Muslim, but the I mean, by the being patronized by a Janissary officer, he doesn't pay. And this was actually what was happening in Wallachia and Moldova. The Janissaries, now we notice with Irfan that they were infiltrating into these regions, buying lands, etc. But they need population. So what they were getting the population from the local Wallachians or Moldovians, promising that they wouldn't force them to pay any taxation. So the poor peasants were going there, yes. So all this pressure in Wallachia and Moldova, and due to their privileged status, in the long run actually contributed to the tributary position and territoriality of these principalities. And it's in no way, 50 years later, you know, that they will declare the independence. So there was a great pressure on, especially in Romania, present Romania, the Janissary pressure, but in as a result, the territorial rise of these principalities were more pronounced, and then in the long run, I think it contributed to the independence movement of Romania.
Thank you. Thank you. I very much appreciate this. I had another general type of question, and that is Janissaries used to be predominantly of Devshirme origin, but then gradually in the 17th century, they became predominantly Muslim-born, and in the 18th century, Devshirme came to a full halt altogether. Do you see, if your research is sort of long-term, do you see any reflections on this in the kind of relations that they establish? Did their relations with, let's say, Christian groups deteriorate as they became more Muslim-born? Is there any correlation in there, or they just keep always working with everybody? Is there any sense you got about this in the sort of longue durée?
At least in the case of Crete, which is like a very interesting case in the sense that, you know, like half of the population became Muslim, like after its after its conquests in 1645 and 1669, like with Candida's conquest. So basically what we see there is that in the beginning, like all the Muslims that were becoming Christians, the Christians that were becoming Muslims, in order to get into the Janissary Corps, they were in good, like, they had very good relations with the Christians, right? So even the Christians in the beginning of the 18th century would call them to intervene in case they had some problem, you know, with the Ottoman authorities and so on. So, but as, you know, like each community starts to like, the Muslim community actually starts to reproduce itself and to become independent, more and more independent from the Christian community for its reproduction. You see that, you know, like their interests also start to become separated. And by the second half of the 18th century, it is obvious that they start hating each other. So we can see this transformation in just like the course of a century. We can see this transformation happening. So if somebody would see that in the longue durée in different provinces, maybe he or she would get a different picture, but like this is what I see in Crete. So yes, in the beginning there is collaboration, but as time passes, their interests start to become separated from the Christian community.
Thank you. Any other sort of clues on this regard? Maybe not. I don't hear any. Let me ask one last question. I'm very sorry. It's going to be my last. I don't want to take more of your time, but I'm so curious. Marino had sort of, you know, written an article on how the Qadizadelis and the Janissaries, their tension? Could that be a reflection of different types of merchant elites and their sort of clash between each other? So in that sense, are there Janissary networks were both representatives of some groups of population, but at the same time, they were an oligarchy. So I'm wondering whether you came across to other Muslims sort of being unhappy about Janissaries having so much power in localities and maybe kind of raising their critique or trying to make room for themselves. What would a Muslim merchant do if he were not from the Janissaries and didn't have access to these better termed credits? Do you see any tension around that at all in any evidence you saw?
I guess Damascus represents a fine example for this kind of tensions. Like half of the population parting with the Janissaries and like half of the population actually supporting the Sayyids of the city. So yeah, but this doesn't mean that this kind of tension was existent in every province. For instance, in Crete, again, sorry, I'm using the example of Crete a lot, but that's my dissertation. So in the case of Crete, for instance, it is clear that pretty much Muslim equals Janissary. So yeah, you can have like intra-Janissary conflicts, but it's between Janissaries. It's not because some other Muslim group would like to have like privileges and they cannot have access to it because he's outside of the Janissary connection. I don't know if somebody would like to add something.
I think, Barki Hocam, for the 18th century, the most important clashes, that is actually that I have seen from records and should be studied in it, the conflicts between Albanians and Janissaries. Albanians emerged as newcomers in 1760s, around the 1760s. And at the beginning, they fought together. But when actually they tried to penetrate into the social fabric and begin to actually take even the tax farms and properties, rural properties, there's some Janissaries even actually raise their voice against them and say that, yes, we are fighting together and we are actually in the same religion. All right, so probably they are referring to the Bektashi's dominancy among the Albanians, but I am not quite sure. But they say these Albanians, these guys are insects. So the Arnavut Asharate. This terminology was fully actually boosted and supported by the imperial vocabulary as well. Up until the evolution of Janissaries. So this is a very interesting relation between Janissaries and actually between Albanians in Rumelia.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I guess, I hope there is no question in the chat that I missed. I don't see any. And we are almost at the 2-hour mark, and you have had an very long day that already started several sessions at your own workshop. Thanks so much for making time to join us here. And then for the audience, I shared in the chat the program of the workshop that is going on at Katip Çelebi University in Izmir today and tomorrow. And there are links in that chat as well. So if you're interested, you can catch the sessions tomorrow there. Thank you so much for making time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Baki.
Thank you,
Christine. Thank you so much
for
working together. The Eastern Mediterranean Initiative. Any new plans for this year, Christine? Are there going to be things that we could share on the WhatsApp or WOW things?
We have a book talk coming up about Jenny White's Turkish Kaleidoscope about Turkey in the 70s, and Nora Fisher-Onar will be the discussant for that. And we have a monthly, if anyone's interested, we have a monthly reading group that we've started for people all over the world in Ottoman Rum nüfusu defterleri. We're reading from 1820s to 1860s. So if anyone is interested in joining, we're creating an open source kind of database and mapping project that would be amazing, because we find Janissaries in some of these. It's a long story, but we have that project that's open to anyone. So get in touch with me if you're interested in joining that. That's it for now, and other things next semester.
Thank you. Thank you. That kaleidoscope book, by the way, is you don't call it, what do you call it? Çizgi roman?
It's a graphic novel.
Yes. Yes. That could be very interesting. That's great.
Yes. October 8th. I'll
October
send
8th.
information, right, and Baki can circulate it. Yeah.
Okay. And October 21st, we will have our next WhatsApp with Abdurrahman Akçıl's group from Sabancı. And we are planning an event, a Turkey Now seminar. We have another series at OTSA for contemporary things going on in Turkey. On October 1st, we are planning to hold an event that will have a lot of participants about Osman Kavala. We will be having a tribute for his 64th birthday, which is October 2nd. So on that day, we hope the video would be ready to be circulated, but there is going to be a Zoom event, and you can hear a lot about what Osman Kavala has done, contributed in arts and peace work and democracy, and then what is going on with his case. So watch for our next email there. Have a wonderful day, and thank you so much for joining us.